Hello, and welcome back to 50 Shades of Grays, the podcast where we dissect sex, relationships, emotional chaos, all through the lens of Grey's Anatomy. I'm Crystal Rose Napolitano. I am your host. I'm a sexologist. I'm a Grey's super fan. And so I'm incredibly qualified to do this podcast, and I love doing it. And we're already on episode 9, which is insane. Episode 9 of this podcast. We're on episode 8 of season 1 of Grey's Anatomy. We've got one more episode of the podcast and of Grey's Anatomy to wrap up season 1. And I'm so excited, and it's been so much fun. But before we dive into the content for today's episode, just so you know, I have a free couples connection guide. This is for you. If you and your partner love each other, you're committed, you've been together a while, but you've just disconnected. You might start to feel like roommates a little bit in the same house. The guide is for you. Just go into the show notes, and it's a little guide that's going to help you reconnect in 10 minutes or less. And you don't have to rehash the same argument. These are just like movement exercises, fun things for you to do to connect with your partner. So go ahead and give that a try. And without further ado, let's get into the episode because it's a beautiful day to save sex lives. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about a subject we have started to talk about in this season of 50 Shades of Grey, but we're going to get even deeper. We have already discussed avoidant attachment style. So that basically means that like someone doesn't feel safe being super close. They prefer to be self-reliant. When things get really vulnerable, they pull back. An avoidant is somebody who learned really early in childhood that their emotional needs won't be met. So they tend to pull away, be independent. They suppress their feelings. They prioritize individuality over connection. And that is kind of like the broader term. There are 2 subcategories of avoidant, and it's the fearful and the dismissive. So today we're going to be talking about the dismissive avoidant. The dismissive avoidant is an even more intense version of this. So these people tend to deactivate attachment and real intimacy almost entirely. So they believe they don't need intimacy. There are certain types of closeness that they can gravitate towards, but certain levels of vulnerability feel really off limits to them. They will suppress it. They tend to appear confident, self-sufficient, unbothered. They don't really look anxious. They look like cool and distant. And they tend to minimize the importance of vulnerability, moving closer, building in a healthy cadence. They tend to dismiss the need for more emotional closeness. So if their partner reaches for emotional intimacy and says, hey, I need this, they minimize it. They say, no, that's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. This is just like broad examples of how a dismissive avoidant can show up. So we're going to be going even deeper today because Derek Shepard has given us such a good example of this topic. We will see this in today's episode so clearly. And they can be charming and super fun. And then when real intimacy is required, they go cold, they disappear, they shut down. And it's really painful for the people in relationship with a dismissive avoidant. And so one of the main differences in an avoidant, a general avoidant, and a dismissive avoidant is a general avoidant might feel that pull towards closeness a little bit stronger than a dismissive avoidant because a dismissive avoidant might dismiss their own feelings and their own desire for real intimacy. And being in a relationship with a dismissive avoidant feels like breadcrumbing. It feels like they'll only get so close and then they'll continuously just be like, oh, that's not important. Don't worry about it. And they brush off the need of their other partner to get closer or for any bids for intimacy. So this is what we're going to be discussing today. So by the end of this episode, you'll know the difference between a partner who just needs time to get closer and to feel safe, which is normal, right? We don't want to jump in and offer someone all of our closeness in the beginning. That's love bombing. There is a natural progression and, hey, I'm not comfortable sharing this with you yet. That's a normal progression of relationship. Or are they a person who just says no to any type of intimacy, any type of vulnerability? And that's the main difference, right? So you're going to be able to know, is this happening? And you're going to have some tools to move closer into intimacy and make a bid for intimacy with your partner. And you'll have tools to stop accepting breadcrumbs. We all want that. You deserve the whole meal, honey. So let's get into our episode. I'm so excited to talk about this. Okay, so the specs of the episode. We are season 1, episode 8 of Grey's Anatomy. The air date is May 15th, 2005. The episode name, which obviously is a song, is called Save Me. So it's interesting because that leads us into our fun fact. So I couldn't find any information online which artist Shonda Rhimes was referring to. If you know, please drop them in the comments, but it's unclear which artist the song is by because there are at least 24 different artists with songs named Save Me from before the episode aired, including Aretha Franklin, Queen, Fleetwood Mac, Amy Mann, Remy Zero. We don't know. We don't know which artist. Like I said, if you have found it, put it in the comments. But that's our fun fact number 1. Save Me, this ambiguous name for this song episode. So our fun fact number 2 is that this episode also has a Gray Matter blog post, and I read it before recording this, and it is essentially talking about some spoilers coming later in this season, but also that at the end of this episode, Meredith chooses to have faith in Derek, and there's a beautiful scene at the end where she reaches out her hand to him. I'll talk about that more in a second. This blog post rehashes parts of this episode, but it's great. It's great to read the blog post and where everybody's head was at. The blog post was written in a gap between season 2 and 3. So this blog post was written at least 20 years ago. And it's really interesting. It's in the show notes if you want to read it. And fun fact number 3, according to the Grey's Fan Wiki page, this was the episode that was submitted for Sandra Oh's first Emmy nomination. So the original source for that is a little murky, but we do know for sure that Sandra Oh was nominated for 5 straight Emmy nominations from the years 2005 to 2009 in the category of supporting actress in a drama. And she never won. So that's a huge bummer because we all know Sandra Oh deserves all the awards ever. So if you have any further information on if this is for sure when she received her first Emmy nomination, put it in the notes. But we also love a little bit of mystery, and go Sandra Oh. Everything you do is perfect. Now for the geek out moment. So I have 2 because this episode is so rich and I had to whittle it down to 2. So the first one is Alex and Christina are teasing George because he's just really worked up into a tizzy fit. And Christina starts telling him, you need to get laid, you need to get laid. And she says, look at that nurse, she has red hair. Look at her over there. And she says the expression, which is just, it cracked me up. She says, go buy her a latte and freshen up your gonad, which is such a good line. I loved it. I loved it. And the second one, it's very sweet. I'm not going to go too much into this character, but it does bear worth mentioning. So they have this character called Mr. Duff, and he's supposed to be a psychic. They find out he has epilepsy and they do an operation on him, but he is able to tell all these different things about the characters and mention little bits of their life that he would have no way of knowing. And it's very fun. It brings some magic to the episode. And so he's afraid to have surgery. He ends up having the surgery because Izzy convinces him to have the surgery. And Izzy is having a kind of crisis of faith about Mr. Duff because in the beginning of the episode, she is trying to make a cupcake, use a recipe that she and her mom used to make, and she can't get it right. She keeps making batches of cupcakes. She can't figure out what the missing ingredient is, and she won't call her mom. Then Mr. Duff starts to give her little bits of information. He calls her the nickname her mom used to call her, and he starts toying with her. And Izzy is like, I know your type. You're just messing with me, blah, blah, blah. And she starts to soften throughout the episode. And she's like, no, maybe there's something here. Mr. Duff has the surgery, and Izzy is with him when he wakes up. They're in an elevator, and Mr. Duff was really scared he was going to lose his psychic ability with the surgery. He wakes up from his surgery and he looks at her and he says, for your recipe, the missing ingredient is 1 tablespoon of coconut extract. And I'm getting chills. It's just such a sweet moment. And Izzy just warms. And this is what pushes her to call her mom. And she makes the cupcakes and she realizes, oh my gosh, that was the missing ingredient. And it's very sweet. And it's a really touching moment. And she calls her mom and says, Mom, it's Cricket, which is obviously her mom's nickname for her that Mr. Duff told her earlier in the episode. So just a beautiful scenario that's written into this episode. This episode does have a big theme of like faith, and I really loved this storyline. Okay, so let's go into Meredith's voiceover intro. To frame this, Meredith and kind of a lot of themes in this episode are having to do with like magic, faith, and fairy tales. And there's a reason this episode is setting us up. It's for what comes next in the next episode, which I'm not going to say, but let's read her intro to set us up for all of this kind of faith-based, beautiful content in the episode. So she says, you know, when you were a kid and you believed in fairy tales, that fantasy of what your life would be, white dress, Prince Charming, who'd carry you away to a castle on a hill. You'd lie in your bed at night and close your eyes, and you had complete and utter faith. Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, Prince Charming, they were so close you could taste them. But eventually you grow up, and one day you open your eyes and the fairy tale disappears. Most people turn to the things and people they can trust. But the thing is, it's hard to let go of that fairy tale entirely because almost everyone has this smallest bit of hope and faith that one day they would open their eyes and it would all come true. Yeah. Big Sam, Meredith. Who else was raised on Disney and is like definitely still waiting for Prince Eric to come. And you know, I'm going to talk a lot about Derek's dismissive avoidance in this podcast episode, but Meredith also is doing a lot of work here, learning how to be close to someone when she doesn't have all the information and letting someone be human and be messy and all of that. So I definitely think Derek is doing a lot more damage in this episode, but I think that's like why we're getting this voiceover in the beginning, because Meredith is talking about this fantasy she had as a kid. And as we know, Meredith had a very hard childhood. Maybe as a kid, she escaped into fairy tales and she's still waiting and all of that. And Derek comes to her in the most random way we don't expect. And as we will learn as the episodes go on, it is definitely not clean. It is not an easy situation. So this sets us up really well for Meredith's journey, but we're going to talk more about Derek in this episode. Okay, let's go into the scene and what we're dealing with here. So in a lot of this episode, Meredith is trying to get information out of Derek and he's refusing. He just is like not engaging with her. And the episode opens with him waking up at her house and Izzy and George are around and they're like, oh, you're a health nut. You eat granola every day. And he's like, no, I don't. And Izzy says, for the past 7 days you have. And Derek goes, oh, wait, I've been here a week, haven't I? And Meredith is like, I don't know anything about you. You're waking up every day in my house, and he's storing his cereal there. And he is existing in this kind of like dismissive avoidant. And she's trying to get more information out of him because she's like, my boss is literally sleeping at my house. I don't know really anything about him except we have sex all the time. And so they have this exchange. I'm going to read to you. They're back and forth, and it infuriates me at the end. We're going to get there. Meredith says, it's just that I hardly know anything about you. Derek, you know I'm from New York. You know I like ferry boats. Meredith, enough with the ferry boats. What about your friends? Derek, I'm a surgeon. I don't have friends. Already I'm angry. It's so dismissive. And it's using his job as an excuse to escape vulnerability. Meredith says, everybody has friends. I mean, who do you hang out with? What do you do on your days off? These are important questions. Derek, important for who? Meredith, we're having sex every night. I think I deserve details. Derek, you have more details than most. Nope. That makes me really angry because he is dismissing her need for emotional closeness. She's asking perfectly reasonable questions. And he is like saying, you have more access than most people. I'm going to go into more in a sec. Meredith says, see, this is going somewhere weird. I want facts. And until I get them, my pants are staying on. You go, girl. Or Derek says, or you could just roll with it. Be flexible. See what happens. Don't love this. He is making it seem like it's her problem that he's emotionally closed off. Very, very, very typical of a dismissive avoidant. Meredith, I'm not flexible. Derek laughs. There, I disagree. I've got to go. We'll find these things out. That's the fun part, that's the gravy. And Meredith says, that's what I'm talking about. I don't want to be your gravy. So the thing here is that Derek isn't just saying, hey, I'm not ready to share that with you. He's not saying that. He's dismissing the entire idea of vulnerability. And that is the flag we need to talk about, that it's perfectly healthy to say, I'm not ready to share that with you. We will move forward. But here, I'll tell you something else about me, or how else can we create vulnerability? I see that you're trying to get close to me and I love that. So let's do it in this way because I feel comfortable with that right now. He's not doing that. He's making it seem like Meredith is the problem. And he is like telling her that it will get there. He's dismissing her. And then he literally runs away. He does get paged, but he runs away. And I don't love it. Later in the episode, this exchange happens. Meredith is asking him all these questions like, what's your favorite flavor of ice cream? What about your grandparents? He literally says, I don't have grandparents. Yes, you do. That's impossible. So she's asking him all these questions. And he literally says, lighten up. It'll be good for your blood pressure. It pisses me off so much, that line. I was like, lighten up? She's trying to get to know you. And Meredith goes, oh, don't you tell me to lighten up. I'll lighten up when I feel light. Yeah. Yeah. No. Like, I've given Derek Shepherd a lot of credit in this podcast so far. No. This is not okay. And he's being dismissive. And something I want to point out too. So as all of this is happening and Meredith is trying to get closer to him, he is treating a patient that's having like increasingly more intense paralysis. So it starts in his feet, goes up his legs, and then he can't move his hands and all of that. And it's really scary. And they can't diagnose him. They did an MRI. They can't figure out what's wrong. And Derek tells Meredith, we're going to cancel the second MRI and I'm taking him into surgery. I think this is really typical of a dismissive avoidant because they're willing to take risks that don't involve intimacy. They're like, okay, yeah, I'm going to leap into this exploratory spinal surgery because I have a feeling in my gut. But he won't tell Meredith his grandparents' names. And it's very interesting, right? He's going to surge forward into this really dangerous, potentially, surgery has very high risks. And even Meredith says, couldn't unnecessary spinal surgery cause even more damage? And he's like, I'm following my gut. But he won't tell Meredith his favorite flavor of ice cream. And he tells her to lighten up. So let's just notice that all of that is happening. And then later in the episode, after the surgery, they do find what's wrong. And as they're scrubbing out, Meredith says to Derek, you keep taking everything on faith. How do you know what's real and what's not? Derek says, you just do. Some people would call this a relationship, the kind where you exchange keys, leave your toothbrush over. Meredith says, who? Who would call it that? Derek says, me, I would. And Meredith says, and I'm supposed to believe you? Derek says, uh-huh. And Meredith says, show me something. Give me a reason to believe. And I get it. Like, he's willing to do all of the kind of like actions to make it look, exchange keys, have a toothbrush over, sleep at her house every night for a week, have his cereal there, but he's not willing to do the emotional closeness thing. That's very indicative of breadcrumbing and a situationship and a dismissive avoidant. But we do love Derek Shepherd. We're going to give him a chance, but we do need to pump the brakes. It's my job as your favorite sexologist to point out unhealthy patterns, and then you get to decide what to do about it. Okay, let's go into the shadow. So what's really going on beneath the surface? So Derek is really fighting his desire and his fear of letting somebody in. So his dismissive avoidant pattern here, it means he's suppressed his desire to be close so much that he's not really matching Meredith's urgency. And I think it goes a little bit beyond that because there's an arrogance to a dismissive avoidant. And when he tells her to lighten up, there's an arrogance there. He's not taking her need for closeness seriously. Someone who genuinely wants to be with you and genuinely wants to build true intimacy is going to hold your desires and your needs in a very important light and not dismiss them. They're going to say, okay, I hear that you need more vulnerability from me, more closeness, more intimacy. these are the ways in which I am comfortable doing that. And then the rest we can get to. They don't just shut down the need altogether and then make fun of you for needing it in the first place. That's really bad. So that's happening here. Like I said, he's taking enormous professional risk, but he won't take moderate risk in the relationship. And it's because surgery doesn't really require him to be like vulnerable and emotionally seen. Intimacy does. And Meredith is also doing something here. And like I said, I think it's less severe, but she's asking for facts because it feels safer than faith, right? She wants to know these things about Derek to feel safe rather than taking a leap. Again, I think everything she's asking for is very, very reasonable. And I think it's healthy to ask for facts and where somebody is. And in our next episode, we're going to have a big reveal that is going to show Meredith had every right to ask for more information. But it is worth noting that as we're dating and as we're getting closer, we do have to incorporate an element of faith that this is a good person, that they want to be with us. However, if this pattern of dismissive avoidance continued, I would say let's evaluate that. If you are continuously not getting your needs met in a relationship, it's great information from you, and maybe it's not the right relationship. So that is like what is happening under the surface for Derek and Meredith. And sexology mode, what's hot and what's harmful. So I will give the character of Derek Shepherd credit here, because at the end, what is hot is he drops his walls and he lets a lot of personal details out in like one breathless monologue. He's like, I have sisters. My favorite flavor is this. I like fly fishing. And he brought Meredith to this land and he lives in this trailer. And he goes, all of this land is mine. I live in that trailer. And he says at the end of his monologue, so that's it. That's all you've earned for now. The rest, you're just going to have to take on faith. And it's very sweet. So we have to give him credit. And then Meredith also changes her approach. She walks towards the trailer and she turns around and she reaches her hand out at him and effectively saying, okay, fine, let's leap. Let's go together. And so I will give Derek credit. He did eventually let his walls down and he allowed Meredith in, which is great. What is harmful is like everything before that. Sleeping with someone every night of a week and refusing to share basic personal information is a form of emotional withholding, and it creates an intimacy imbalance because he's getting this like insight into all of her life. He's hanging out with her roommates in her house. He's using her storage space, but he's not giving her equal access to his life. And that is what we really need to notice. And it puts all of the emotional or most of the emotional risk on Meredith, which we've already talked about. It's already there because she is the intern and he's the attending. And he even tells her, you have more details than most. That's not intimacy. That's not actually addressing what she's asking for. He's deflecting there. And I also want to mention that kind of like withholding all of the information and then dumping it all is not a great pattern. We need to like have consistent like forms of growing and intimacy and vulnerability and sharing, right? We don't want to like withhold and not do anything and keep people at a distance and then dump just because they're asking us. That's not a healthy pattern. So while we are happy that Derek let Meredith in, it needs to not be this like up and down wave. Political and cultural influences, gender dynamics. So this episode was made in 2005. And I want to name that the episode frames Meredith as needy. And a lot of story was told that way of when women ask men they're dating for emotional closeness, they're looked at as needy, demanding, emotional, annoying, desperate, all of those things. I want to call that shit out right now because it is 100% okay for you to ask the person you are dating or you are partnered with or married to for more emotional closeness. And I want to name that the ask is never unreasonable. To ask somebody you want to build intimacy with for more emotional intimacy is totally okay. I cannot speak to if they have the capacity, the willingness, or the desire to give it to you. I don't know. But the ask is always okay. You just also have to have the skills to receive their answer if it isn't what you want. And also evaluate, is this a relationship that's going to meet my needs and give me the emotional closeness that I desire? But you are not wrong for asking for more. And I want to name, it's not okay to shame somebody for asking for more emotional intimacy. It's not okay to dismiss them or anything. So that was a really common dynamic and still is in media. And it frames women as needy. I have said this before, you're only as needy as your most unmet need. And if Meredith needs more from Derek, it just means she needs more from Derek. That doesn't mean Derek is capable of giving it to her, but it does mean her needs, her desires, and her asks are totally okay. And so are yours. So never shame somebody for asking for something more. That doesn't mean you have to give it to them, but them asking is a beautiful thing. And if you don't know what to say, if your partner asks you, like, hey, I need this from you, and you aren't in a place to give it, you can use a script, something like this. Put it into your own words, but you can use the script of, thank you so much for your ask. I can tell you're wanting to get close to me, and I love that you want to get close to me. I'm not ready to share that with you right now, but the ways in which I am willing to get closer to you are this and this and this. How does that feel? And then just let them respond. You're welcome. Thank me later. All right, let's get into the work. So, what does this episode teach us about desire? So, Derek desires closeness, but he has something shut down in him. And it's like he's like role playing closeness, but he's not actually letting himself squish into the desire he feels for Meredith in a way that is like vulnerable and where he has risk on the line because he's her boss. Like, he's her boss, just like sleeping with her and not telling her about his life. It's not great. And so he's not allowing himself to really be in his desire. And Meredith is desiring facts and withholding, like jumping in on faith because she needs more facts. Again, I think Meredith deserves the facts, but it's interesting to look at the character of Meredith needing more facts and not jumping in on faith, which I think she's actually doing a really healthy balance here. If you're going to choose to date your boss, you shouldn't only do it on faith. There does need to be some mutual vulnerability. So Meredith's desire for him, she's actually like protecting herself in a really healthy way. And Derek is protecting himself in an unhealthy way, even though they both want the same thing. They want to be close to each other. They have desire for each other. So Meredith is very much exhibiting what it's like to date a dismissive avoidant. And Derek is the dismissive avoidant in this episode. And what it teaches us about attachment, like I said, he is the dismissive avoidant in this episode. He is deeply ingrained in this like charming, oh, it's not a big deal. You should relax. It's good for your blood pressure. Like, makes me want to throw something through a wall when he says that. But it's a shutdown. It's like I'm going to deflect. I'm going to make it funny. I'm going to make it her problem. And the person dating a dismissive avoidant, they end up feeling like they're too much when they're just asking like what's normal for a healthy relationship. And that is so damaging. If you've ever been in that like dynamic, I have, put it in the comments. You can just put a little hands up. Like, I have been in the dynamic that made me feel like my emotional needs were too much. Your emotional needs are not too much. And if you're bringing your emotional needs to someone and they are making you feel like they're too much, that means that person doesn't have the capacity to give you what you need. And also they don't have the tools to make sure that you know your needs are not too much, even if they don't have the capacity, because we're not always going to have the capacity to meet our partner's needs, but we should never be making them feel like their needs are too much. So yeah, if that's you, put it in the comments. And then what does this teach us about communication? So what came up for me in this episode is like breadcrumbing. And Derek is breadcrumbing intimacy, which is communication. It's communicating, I'm not able, willing, in desire of being closer to you, or at least telling you really what's going on. And in the end, he does communicate with her, which is great. But I want you to like notice from this episode the kind of like up and down, like I said, like nothing and then everything. And if that continues, that's a really unhealthy communication pattern. Relationships are going to have natural up and downs, but they should feel pretty sustainable, pretty consistent, not pretty consistent, very consistent. Your relationship should feel consistent enough so your nervous system can relax. And withholding information and then dumping, not a great communication pattern, but we do love that he opened up, like I said. So withholding and then information dumping is not a great communication pattern. And I do want to give him credit for the last scene because he does communicate with Meredith in exactly the way she was asking. He answers every single one of her questions. He answers his ice cream flavor, all of the questions she was asking. And it's that like construction of his vulnerability is very sweet because it means he was listening. We just need him to live in like less extremes. Now let's go into the session. So obviously we're giving the session to Derek today. So I'm going to invite Derek, come and sit on my couch. And I am going to ask you, Derek, and if you're listening to this, you can also do this session along with me. So Derek, I'm going to ask you to place your hand on your heart, maybe both of your hands, and just take a breath into your heart. I want you to notice what's happening inside of your heart. Maybe there's some emotions there. Maybe there's feelings, sensations. Just notice. And now, Derek, I want you to imagine Meredith asking you for intimacy. Meredith asking you what your favorite ice cream flavor is, what your grandparents' names are. And I want you to notice what your heart does when you hear her asking. And I want you to notice all of the emotions that come up when she asks you for closeness. And all of those emotions are normal and good and okay. And those emotions are not Meredith's fault. And let's take a breath into them and name them, whatever they are. I feel blank. Maybe it's shame, abandonment, isolation, whatever it is for you. Just notice what closeness is bringing up inside of you. And remember, this is not the person who's asking for closeness. It's not their fault that you're feeling this. That was probably put there a long time ago. So take a breath into the emotions, and I want you to tell them, it makes sense you're here. I love you. And I'm the adult, and I want a healthy relationship. So thank you for trying to protect me, but I've got this. So take a breath in, exhale out anything you don't need. And Derek, know that what you're going through is normal. It makes so much sense. And if you want a successful relationship with Meredith, you have to find a way to sit with those feelings and not shut down when Meredith asks for closeness. I really recommend you get a practitioner to help you do that. So let's all take a breath and exhale. And know that dealing with these emotions that come up when we get scared of closeness is going to allow you to build a really consistent, safe, healthy relationship, because it is not the person in front of you's fault for wanting more from you. It's not. But your feelings inside of you are totally normal and they make a lot of sense. And I love you, even with your messy, complicated emotions. Okay, so here's your hot tip for the week. I want you to notice whether you and notice your partner or the person you're dating or your spouse, are they giving you information or are they giving you intimacy? So intimacy is something that brings you closer. Information, like you can know 100 facts about somebody, but that doesn't mean you are intimate with them. So is your partner giving you information or intimacy? Do you feel closer? Does your nervous system feel more at ease? Or do you feel more like a stranger? Just notice. There doesn't need to be anything that changes, but just start to notice patterns. And maybe you're the one doing it. And it's helpful to notice that too. And your micro ritual, I want you to find somebody in your life. It could be your partner, it could be a friend. And I want you to tell them something you've never told them before. And not information. I want you to tell them something that is a feeling and something that costs you a little bit to say out loud. You don't have to dump all of your deepest secrets on this person, just something that stretches you a tiny bit into closeness, and then notice what feelings come up. and notice how you feel afterwards, and make this person someone you really trust to help you with that. You can even tell them, hey, I'm practicing not shutting down and not being so independent. Can I share something with you? And then you can share it, depending on their response, you can share your feeling that's going to stretch you. And whatever feelings come up afterwards, that discomfort is the edge of your growth. And that is what you need to sit with and be with and love on. And you should be so proud of yourself if you do this. It is such an incredible feat to intentionally express vulnerability. I try to do it all the time in my practice, in my podcast, in my business, in my individual life, in my personal life. It's actually one of my personal values and my business values, because I want to give permission to people to be able to do the same. And empowered vulnerability is really intoxicating, and it's really wonderful, and it builds relationships, and it's a skill. Vulnerability and feeling safe afterwards is a skill. And I still get vulnerability hangovers all the time. It's a practice. It is not perfect, but I do invite you to practice being vulnerable just once this week. And if you are vulnerable this week, put in the comments or send me a DM of what it was like to be vulnerable with that person, what feelings came up in you, and how you sat with them, how you breathed with them, and how you moved through it. I really genuinely want to know, and you're so brave for doing it. Now, to round out our episode, we're going to go into Meredith's voiceover outro. So what she says is, at the end of the day, faith is a funny thing. It turns up when you don't really expect it. It's like one day you realize that the fairy tale may be slightly different than you dreamed. The castle, well, it may not be a castle. And it's not so important that it's happily ever after, just that it's happy right now. See, once in a while, once in a blue moon, people will surprise you. And once in a while, people may even take your breath away. And I just got chills again. I love this show. And she says that as she like turns around and like reaches her hand out for Derek. And it's very, very sweet and beautiful. This is a great episode. There's so many interesting storylines that we couldn't get into today in our episode, but I really recommend this one. It's so rich. Next week, for the season finale of 50 Shades of Grey's and of Grey's Anatomy, I have a very special surprise, but you'll have to wait until next week to know what it is. And I'm so proud of you for showing up, for doing the work, for listening to things that might make you uncomfortable. I am so grateful you're a listener of this podcast. Again, if you and your partner are feeling disconnected, grab my free couples connection guide in the show notes. Tell me what you think of the guide. I really would love to know how you and your partner move through it. And I hope you take all these tips and implement them into your week. And we will see you on the next episode of 50 Shades of Grey's. I love you, messy humans.